panel, and we're going to start off talking about probably the most important asset in any firm or any business, which is people. So I'm going to be introducing each member of the panel as we go along, and they've all got a few minutes to talk to you, and then if we have time, we'll do a few more questions at the end. And I know what it's like in these panel sessions. We're going to be very concise, we're going to cover as much as we can, but I'm sure that many of the people listening will have lots of thoughts and questions, and we'll try and deal with as many of the themes that are really important at the moment as we can in this time. So I'm going to start with something that's very close to a lot of our hearts at the moment, which is the European football. And for those of you who hate football, I apologise for bringing it up. And for those who are loving the tournament, I thought it'd be really helpful to bring in one of the real stars of our panel, which was Catherine Baker, who's part of the founder of Sport and Beyond, got a very strong sporting background. And I know that, Catherine, you've been looking at the joys of the Euros. And I think you've got quite a few lessons that you can share with us about what you've been seeing and how it relates to how we look after people in our businesses.
Yeah, thank you very much, Francesca. I'm delighted to be here and welcome everybody. There are a couple of themes that I wanted to touch on just very briefly, where I was able to shed some light from the world of sport across into the world of professional services. My first career was as a corporate lawyer, so I kind of understand where you guys sit in your day job. The two areas I wanted to touch on were around a sense of belonging and the importance of relationships. Now, any good sports coach would say never cover more than 3 things in a session. I'm going to do just those 2 because of the time that we have and all the great other speakers you have to listen to. So starting off with sense of belonging, and this is very much thinking internally in terms of your people. Now, pretty much exactly this time 2 weeks ago, in the atrium at St George's Park, which is the national base for the FA, Gareth Southgate and the entire Euro squad took part in a really, really special ceremony. Each player in the squad was presented with a red velvet cap, and on that cap was sewn in their individual legacy number. Now, this is the number that represented where they sat in the table in terms of players pulling on an England jersey. So you've got Jordan Henderson, who was given a cap with number 1,170. The latest recruit, Sam Johnston, number 1,262. Even Gareth was given his own cap because, of course, he was a player, number 1,071. And what was this all about? It was about creating a really strong sense of identity, a sense of where they came from, what the legacy was from all the players through, a real sense of special feeling that they're part of a really, really important group. And I think this is something which has been particularly difficult through the pandemic for so many organisations, but something actually which it is possible for organisations to focus on as we move out of the pandemic and everything it's brought with it. So that was the first quick point I wanted to make on sense of belonging. The second is around a sense of connection. Now, again, something that's been quite hard to engender through the pandemic with everybody working remotely, that sense of connection. Dr. Pippa Grange is a sports psychologist who worked with the England football team in the build-up to the World Cup. And she put a lot of focus around a sense of connection, really a better and a deeper understanding between the players and between the squad. There's one very simple technique that you can, if you choose, take back to your teams and organisations to use straight away. And it's called the Triple H. And in this, it's been used for lots of sports teams across the world. It's a sense of, or a case of asking every individual member to stand up and share 3 personal stories around a hero, a hardship, and a highlight. So a hero, a hardship, and a highlight. So just a very, very simple tool that can help build a sense of connection. So that sense of belonging, just very briefly in terms of external, I wanted to focus on the importance of relationships. Now, it can be very easy when we're all under pressure, like we've been through the pandemic, to focus on, I think, especially professional services firms, to focus on doing the job well, getting the work done, making sure technically you're correct, etc. But it's really, really important always to remember the importance of building and sustaining relationships. I'm just going to share very quickly one piece of insight from the United States. Bunch of soccer coaches who were all pretty experienced. They'd qualified a long time ago and they were pretty experienced. They'd done all their coaching qualifications and badges. And they were all asked, if there's one thing that you would identify that you weren't taught as part of your training, you know, it wasn't necessary for your badges and your qualifications, but actually it's been probably the most important thing in your job as coach, what would that be? And what was the number one thing that was identified? I wish we'd been taught about the importance of relationships, because relationships drive everything. There we go. I probably haven't got time to share anything else, Francesca, so I hope that's helpful.
Fantastically helpful. I'd highly recommend anybody to sign up to Catherine's blog as well. Lots of great information on a regular basis. Let's move topic for a few minutes, and let's move into something else that's incredibly important in terms of our people agenda, and that's been how people have coped with the pandemic. And mental health has been right at the top of the list. People's well-being, how they're keeping together, how they're managing to cope. So I'm particularly pleased to welcome the next panelist, which is Dr. Sarah Hattam. And Sarah has done a couple of fantastic Friday panels for us. She is the GP and founder of Concilio Health. And Sarah, give us your insight into what you're seeing today about what is really working for people in terms of managing their mental health in these difficult times.
Thank you. And thank you, Francesca and Richard, for inviting me on. It's a great privilege to join you this afternoon. And great. Thank you, Catherine, for what you shared. And I think that whole piece about connection is just so important to bear in mind when it comes to our mental health and the mental health of our people. So we absolutely know that I think it was about 12 years ago in the UK, the New Economics Foundation was commissioned to look at mental wellbeing up and down the UK. And along with Foresight, they wrote a report which talked about the 5 ways to wellbeing, these 5 pillars that actually underpin optimal wellbeing. And one of those critical ones was actually connection. I think that's been one of the big problems with the pandemic. So we know that the University of Cambridge and UCLA got together and did a bit of research, because obviously we worry about our Gen Zs, particularly in the pandemic. And their bit of research was entitled "Welcome to My Zoom Party." And what they found was that, particularly for the emerging generation, people starting out in work, that actually virtual connection was just no substitute at all for face-to-face connection. The frequency of virtual connection just didn't have any bearing on well-being, and that this lack of interpersonal, meaningful face-to-face connection was causing a significant rise in depression, unhappiness. So I think as we go back into the workplace, I think in terms of mental health, we have to give people permission to be honest about where they are. We know that, as Adam Grant wrote in the New York Times back in May, this sense of, he coined the term languishing, this sort of in-between zone of in between burnout and overt mental ill health and good mental health, which is what we want to strive for. And I think it's this sort of sense of blah is a sense that a lot of people can relate to. We feel fatigued, and there's very good reasons for that. We know about the work of Dr. Hans Selye, who several decades ago described something called the general adaptation syndrome, where for short bursts of stress, our bodies are equipped to get us over that hurdle. But when stress persists for a long time, actually our body's resources to mitigate against and manage that stress, even though we might think we're doing a pretty good job in the face of the challenge, actually our resources dwindle and we tip over into fatigue, exhaustion, that sense of ennui with life. And one of the things around mental health is it's often helpful to look at how people are functioning, not just in work, because sometimes we hold it together in work, but it's at home. We're irritable, we procrastinate on the small jobs, that kind of thing. And I think when we're thinking about organizations taking a strategic approach to mental health as we return and repopulate offices, whether we're moving to full flexible working, as Deloitte have just announced this week, or whether we're going to have some sort of hybrid working policy, we do need to bear in mind that actually we can't just make mental well-being about individual resilience. You know, we can't just pull drowning people out of the river. It's not just about awareness raising and saying that it's okay not to be okay. It's not. it is about stopping people falling in. And particularly for professional services firms, we need to think about the ways in which we are asking people to work and take not just an individual approach to well-being and resilience, and equipping people to manage their physical and mental well-being, because obviously both are interlinked. But we have to take a strategic organizational approach to look at ways of working in that organization, and really think about, actually we have a once in a generation opportunity here to really reset, recalibrate, and put well-being, particularly mental well-being, right at the heart of the business. And treating people right and doing that makes perfect economic sense. So that's where I'd like to end. Those are my thoughts or ramblings on mental health.
No ramble there. That's great advice. That I'm now going to see if I can bring in Segun, who's Osuntokun, who's got the land managing partner role. How have you managed to bring that kind of thinking into your business, and have you got any insight as to how you can execute on that as a managing partner?
I mean, it's a subject of which, of course, we can talk for a very, very long time, because it's right at the heart of the conversations going on in the workplace, at home, in the media, everywhere. And it's such an important subject that and so broad that how do you narrow it? How do you pick where you stand as an organization? And I think Sarah's point is right. You need to have a strategic aspect to it, but also you need to have individualized and specific efforts which meet people where they are. And I come at this from so many different angles. I'm a believe it or not, I'm a part-time psychologist student at Birkbeck, where I find the time on a Tuesday evening to attend lectures. From a family perspective, I have a daughter, and she wouldn't mind me sharing this, who has had a severe mental health diagnosis since she was a young teenager. So we live with that every day. In the office, I see the impact the pandemic is having on people's everyday lives. And when I talk about meeting people where they are, I am talking about meeting people along that spectrum I've just described. Those who have or are coping with severe mental illness, and let's not forget that is actually a big part of the population when we talk about those who are within their lifetimes likely to suffer from some form of mental illness. Then you've got the other end of the spectrum, where I hope most people, and I wish most people are, which is around mental flourishing, mental well-being, if you like, mental fitness, and the ability to be resilient in the face of so much stress and uncertainty. And I think that organizations need to be able to cater for all of that. So in BCLP, for instance, we have mental health first aiders, whose job it is and whose responsibility and vocation, if you like, is to be ears and eyes in the workplace, on the ground, being able to spot and perhaps speak to those who are tipping or experiencing symptoms of mental illness or mental or wellness. And then you've got the more the programs that are designed to build people's resilience, increase connection, as both Catherine and Sarah have talked about, building connections, having conversations, sharing experiences, which to me are the bedrock of good mental health and wealth. And so we have programs. We have a mental well-being team that meets every 2 weeks. It's constantly coming up with ideas about how we can share experiences, promote activities that boost well-being. We host a podcast where people share their experiences during the pandemic, which is meant to increase connection as well. We've launched free subscriptions to a well-being app, as I'm sure there are a number which we I don't want to skew it by naming my own favorite one, but those are the sort of things that you need to, I think, do to cater for that spectrum of where people are, meeting where people they are, and ensuring that as much as you can, you build a platform and a network that meets those needs. So I am conscious that there's more to talk about on this, but I thought I'd just share with you my own personal interest, my own experiences, and what I see the firm and the London office doing to meet this particular, I think, dire need at the moment. So I'll stop there.
That's fantastic. Lots of really practical tips. And I know that many people have been dealing with a range of pretty difficult situations that perhaps has accelerated things that were already there but weren't so obvious pre-COVID. So just great to get that advice and input. I'm going to just slightly change the topic, but bringing in something else that really is about being inclusive and encouraging everybody to be themselves. So I'm delighted our last panelist today is Sue Vinnicombe, CBE, Professor of Women and Leadership at Cranfield School of Management. And Sue, we were going to look particularly around that diversity and inclusion agenda, which is vast and has never been more important in my view, to encourage us, everybody to have the opportunity to reach their full potential. But have you got any particular insight as to how people can take D&I in all its various guises and actually do something that really works rather than just being an initiative or a program? What are the things that you're seeing that are actually making a difference?
Thank you very much, Francesca. And I think very clever of you to leave me to the last, because I think all the themes that have already been debated or raised this afternoon are very relevant to the whole area of diversity and inclusion, the whole importance of relationships and belonging, mental well-being, of building connections are very relevant. And as you so rightly say, it's not just about diversity. The other piece to diversity is it's not just about bringing more women, more racial diversity, more disabled, etc., into the organisation, but it's then how do you build an inclusive culture and make sure they stay? So whilst I think we've made, particularly on the gender front, because obviously we're much further ahead on that than the race and ethnicity in organisations, whilst we've increased the number of women, we're still not seeing them in the very senior positions. And, you know, I think that's very important. And to your point about what can make the difference, I think what has most encouraged me is actually seeing the organisations who are really delving into that granular data. You know, this whole excuse in the past about, well, it's down to unconscious bias. I've always been very dismissive, even perhaps a bit rude about it. And I just say to people, look at your data. I mean, if we don't have many partners in professional service firms, look at the pipeline, look at the proportion of women or whoever the group is that you're actually promoting. And I think once you start looking at that kind of database, then you start unraveling where the actual issues are. And I've seen a lot of progress there, Francesca, on taking a much more data-driven approach to all the HR processes of selection, of promotion, of how appraisals work and how often diverse people get put down because we don't consider them in the same way. It's this whole thing about belonging. So the work we're doing now actually at Cranfield is very much to your point about the absolutely fundamental importance of building an inclusive culture. I mean, one of the things that struck me in the latest Hampton-Alexander final report was just the number, the percentage of very senior women at the top, the 2 levels below the board, who are actually leaving each year, 30% of the FTSE 350. Well, yes, it creates capacity for new appointments, but the sadness for me is, why are they leaving? There must be something wrong with the organisation. And I think organisations really need to keep an eye on this data. Sarah talked about COVID. That's another piece. We know from a recent McKinsey report that many more men than women, A, feel anxious about going back to work, B, are talking about reducing their hours, 3, are talking about putting their careers completely on pause. And even worse than that, more extreme, are thinking of leaving the workforce because they just feel they are struggling so much. And I think, you know, that's a real warning to organisations that you might think everyone's doing well, but it's really important to check in. I mean, we've done some roundtables just with our own staff at the university, and I was amazed at the level of anxiety amongst particularly some of the women I've talked to. So I think the message for me is, you know, don't assume you know what's going on in your organization. Look at the hard data, but also look at the soft data. I know these are messages that have already been raised this afternoon, but the real importance of talking to people about how you build an inclusive organization. And I, you know, love that those 3 H's from Catherine about listen to what individuals' experiences are of organizations. We know already on the gender front that men in general experience work in their organizations in a much more positive way than women. And we need to do this for everyone, going beyond just gender and race and ethnicity and neurodiversity. I mean, Segun talked about mental health. I also have a daughter who has, you know, mental health issues. It's really important to understand how they work and how we can support these people to really contribute to their full in organizations. So I guess I'm really endorsing what others have said, but this real importance of HR processes being much more data driven than they have in the past.
Fantastic advice, Sue. And isn't it fascinating that in this panel we've already so there's real personal stories as well, you know, how we're seeing this come to life in the people that we have relationships with. Final question for everybody. In one line, in one short line, if you were talking to managing partners, what is the most important thing they should be doing in relation to their people right now? So you get, encapsulate everything in your head in one line. And I'm going to go around the panel in the order that they spoke. So Catherine.
Very simple, red velvet cap.
Love it. Sarah.
I'm going to endorse what Susan said. Get the data. Know what's driving your people's mental and get as much data from your people as you can. Ask them.
Ask the data. Yeah. Don't take it for granted. Love that. Segun.
Speak less, listen more. That's it.
Wonderful. You threw me there for a minute. That was so beautifully done. And Sue, final word from you.
Yeah, I just think thank you, Francesca. I just think a final word about COVID. I mean, there have been some hidden benefits. And so when we talk and consult with our employees to make sure we pull out what have been the great things that we've learned. So let's not just kind of feel job done. It's an aberration, as I think somebody famous from banking said, and let's get back to business as usual. No, let's learn what we've experienced over the last 16, 17 months and take those benefits forward.